Hi, this is Ken McCarthy, and I am, among other things, the author of this book, What the Nurses Saw. To put this book together, I interviewed 8 nurses, one respiratory therapist, and one forensic accountant investigator. And we put together a model so that folks can understand some of the things that happened in the hospitals during the COVID, what I call the COVID panic. And I am learning that some of this activity is still continuing. Today we have with us one of the nurses that we worked with to put this book together, Ashley Gog. Welcome, Ashley.
Hi, good to see you again, Ken.
Great. Thank you so much for being willing to come back again. This book is scary. There's no question about it. But it wasn't written with the intention to terrorize. It was written with the intention to inform, and not just inform, but suggest productive paths that people can take. And so Ashley has been so kind to send me really detailed thoughts about those issues in writing. And I thought, well, gee, let's get this on video. So all of us that are concerned about this, and this really is every thinking person, has some guidance from somebody who's knowledgeable, experienced in the trenches, and has given it a lot of thought. So, Ashley, we're going to cover two big swaths of information. One is, yeah, it's a lot. This is
That's
heavy
a lot.
duty stuff. I don't think any of us thought, when we were kids, this is what we're going to be doing when we grew up. I thought I was going to be a fireman or something, or an astronaut. Um, but this is where we're at, and this is the work we're doing. So, we have the very real issue that hospitals are doing. We'll give them the benefit of the doubt. They're doing their best. They are not risk-free zones. Ignorance on the part of anybody, whether it's a practitioner or a patient or a family member, does not pay off. Um, but then how do we approach this in a productive, intelligent, as stress-free as possible, to the extent that's even possible, so that we get a good outcome as opposed to terrorizing ourselves or unnecessarily creating an antagonistic situation where one is not necessarily needed. So, uh, you've given a lot of thought to this, so take it away, Ashley.
Yeah, I'm honored, to be here and to talk about this. And I think that first step is patient advocacy. One of the big things that happened during, the panic, as you say, is they removed those advocates out. We've kind of moved into this age of the informed patient. And sometimes informed patients will be called Dr. Google and things like that. But we've
Doctor,
really,
Doctor, Doctor Google.
Dr. Google,
So
yeah.
it's kind of a diss. It's like, oh, you learned your medicine from Google. I'm not going to listen to you. Okay.
Yeah, and sometimes that's true. Like I do a lot of work with advocacy because I think this is the key piece. Patients have to be able to advocate for themselves. The healthcare industry for decades has been one in which you can get lost in. There are healthcare silos. There are all of these systemic issues that we've had for legitimately decades. It's not just COVID. This started long before COVID. It just was like multiplied by 10 with COVID. But you have to be able to advocate for yourself. You have to be an informed patient. Otherwise, you run the risk of, you know, poor care, a lack of care, or the wrong care. And those are a lot of really different and terrifying options. And I think those have all been identified in what the nurses saw. So, looking at this from kind of that holistic perspective of what's the best way that I can ensure that I'm going to get the best care, and that is self advocacy because nobody is going to care about your health and your long term outcomes more than you or maybe your loved ones.
Yeah.
And they make great advocates too. So it's being informed about your conditions and also knowing how to have the conversations and not being afraid of them. America got really used to take 2 aspirin and call me in the morning,
Hmm.
and that's really detrimental. And the hospitals are filled with protocol medicine, and that's been that way for decades. Okay, we have to
And by pro
understand.
and by protocol medicine, we mean kind of cookbook. It's all one size fits all.
You come in with pneumonia, you have the pneumonia order set. You come in with cellulitis, you have a cellulitis worksheet, or order set that the nurses have to go through, and it looks like a worksheet. You check the boxes. The doctors, that's how they place the orders. Okay, they have to have this, they have to have this. If this is the case, then they do this. And so it has really removed the critical thinking aspect from these decisions. And I just ran into this issue with my father. He tells me, hey, I think I want to delay my colonoscopy. And I'm like, well, why are you getting a colonoscopy in the first place? Well, because they called me and told me to. And I was like, okay, can we talk about this a little bit more?
Mm-hmm.
And so, I'm sitting here and I'm talking with him. We go through this whole thing, and he takes my advice and calls the doctor's office, and they say, huh, this is really weird. You're not an established patient with us. We don't have record of you. Um, I don't know how you got called. So it probably would be a good idea for you to see somebody before you had that colonoscopy. And I'm like,
So this was
that
just some little computer bug, or he got added to the wrong list, or
I don't know. It might have been 5 years, since he had his, what it hasn't. I don't know. It doesn't matter. The
right.
point of the story is the fact that mistakes are made. Nothing is perfect. It's crazy. Things get lost, and you don't have that relationship with one physician anymore. You have like, if you have a lot of health concerns, you have like five, right? Six, eight, depending on how many of your organs are not working properly anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it's the idea of being able to ask the questions. Had we not had that conversation, and what started the conversation was he hadn't met his deductible this year, so he wanted to pop it over to next year, and that's why we had the conversation. And he didn't think to ask, well, why am I doing this instead of one of these other options? So having the knowledge and understanding that you don't just have to follow the instruction, asking, well, why am I doing this? What is the reason for me doing this?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's perfectly acceptable. You're paying that doctor for his opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I wouldn't recommend going in and talking to a doctor like that. There's a certain amount of respect that needs to be shared, but you're paying them for their opinion. They should be helping you make informed decisions. It's not shared decision making, it's not informed consent, it's informed decision making. So you're going to do a risk benefit analysis, and this is all part of being an informed patient and advocating for yourself, because you don't want to make decisions without feeling comfortable with the risks and the benefits and how that all works out. And there may be alternatives, and that was one thing that I talked with my dad. So on my website you can find an advocacy guide, and it goes through just some basic steps. So why is advocacy important to you? Who can act as an advocate for you if you can't? Are your needs being met? What kind of support do you need? What are your health and treatment goals? If it's an acute situation, well, I want to be able to breathe again.
Mm-hmm.
you know, those sort of things. Identifying those areas and then listing out, getting the options. What are my options for treatment? It is rarely that there are just one option for
Mm-hmm.
treatment.
Mm-hmm.
When I would sit down with a patient and educate them, and I worked advanced heart failure, I would say, okay, this is your situation, and this is what happens with most people in this situation.
Mm-hmm.
You have the ability to try, these different interventions, and this is for each one of them, this is what happens, or this is what could happen. And we would go over the full gamut so they could really look at that and say, okay, this aligns with my health goals. This aligns with my personal, religious, and past experiences, because each of those things are going to be taken into account. My mother-in-law refuses to get a colonoscopy because her brother had a adverse event, an error was made, and he ended up bleeding to death. Um,
Yeah.
and so for her, the anxiety that a colonoscopy would cause would be far too much, and I wouldn't try to force that on her. There are other options. So it's this balancing act of finding what option is the best for you to meet your health goals, and that is what self-advocacy is going to allow you to do, because you're objectively looking at these different options in front of you. And if you don't like any of the options, none of them fit, get a second opinion.
Mm-hmm.
So feeling comfortable and being empowered to ask the questions, to push back and say, well, I agree with you on this, but I disagree on this, or
Mhm.
I know that you are saying that this is my problem, but I really am concerned that something else might be my problem. Can you tell me or explain to me why you think this instead of that? And really, magic can happen in that space
Mhm.
where you're having this conversation. The doctor's going to get more details. You're going to learn about what's happening in your body. They're going to be able to explain those processes. A good doctor will do this.
Mhm.
And so you guys can come to this mutual understanding, and something that could have been, a really horrible situation
Mhm.
is now no big deal because you each have had the chance to kind of voice your concerns and then come to this conclusion. And you should respect the doctor for their opinion, not be rude, but the doctor also has a requirement to respect you as a patient and your decisions for your health. And part of the problem we see with the cookie cutter medicine or cookbook medicine, protocol medicine, is that especially for certain conditions, COVID, heart failure, kidney failure, um, when your lungs are damaged, COPD, they have these prescriptions or these protocols that are set out by the government. And if they're not following those particular protocols, they're getting dinged and questioned as to why their patients aren't meeting those requirements. So it's a much bigger issue, but if you can come at it from approach of I hate to use the word collaborative because, you know, the doctor doesn't get to say. The doctor's duty is to inform and support and educate. Um, but that is collaboration, right?
Mhm.
But when you move out of that situation where you can really work together to find out what's best for the individual, it's really damning to the patient. So
When you move away from that, where you
yeah, when
yeah.
that ability to work together and use them to the best of their ability.
I guess some of the takeaways is, you have an expert that you're conferring with, and you be respectful the way you'd be respectful to your auto mechanic or to your plumber or anybody that's doing a job for you. You're respectful. You respect their experience and opinion. You give them the benefit of the doubt. You assume they if they've got a garage and they've been around for 20 years, you assume they know how to fix cars, but you have all the questions that you have that you need to ask. And what you're looking for is, okay, doctor, what do you think the problem is? I guess that's a fundamental question. Can you explain to me what it is? And I guess the next question is, okay, what are my options, plural? And you rightly point out that it's very rare that there's only one thing. I mean, if someone's artery is cut, there's only one thing to do is lean your weight into it. Okay, we get that. But that's a rare occurrence. There's often a variety of things. Each one of these things has a kind of a probabilistic outcome. We've out of the last 100,000 cases, this is sort of kind of what happens. And each one of these options has a downside, sometimes a minor one, sometimes a major one. And so this is the checklist of things you want to go through with your doctor when you're consulting with a doctor.
Yeah, and there's a free advocacy worksheet on my website that people can go and download and use. I have a master class that goes into much more depth, but I think, one of the things that we were talking about earlier is you get these situations where either the communication is not there, something has interrupted it, or um, whatever is preventing that is there. And we talked about the importance of advocacy and knowing when to go to that next step. And so, you can advocate for yourself, you can have a family member help, but there may be a point, especially as we saw with some of the COVID protocols, where these situations get really tricky because it could be standard procedure and maybe it is what needs to happen, but maybe it's not. And so having somebody with clinical background who can step in, be a neutral party, come in, get both sides of the story, which would be a nurse advocate. And there are plenty of these out there that you can find and work with, but finding that nurse advocate to go over your chart, to see what's going on, to talk to you, to see your history, have that again, kind of collaborative relationship where there's give and take in the conversation and you're learning from each other.
Hmm.
The nurse is teaching you about your body. You're teaching the nurse about your body and your situation.
Right, right.
So that way they can make recommendations, make sure that that care is the highest quality for you. And one of the things that I really try to do is to, and I still, try to do this through that worksheet and through the masterclass is giving people the tools to ask those questions. So one advocate might actually have a conversation with the doctor. Another advocate might say, "Okay, here is what I'm noticing. This is the direction I think this is going. I think these things are correct. I think these things may or may not be different. These are the questions that I want you to ask." I had a
Hmm.
patient who was hospitalized um, with a heart attack,
Hmm.
and the daughter called me and asked a bunch of questions and was really concerned. And, they're doing this. Should we be worried about this? Okay, why don't you ask the doctor about the risk for pneumonia? Is there anything that you can be doing? Because she was really concerned about her dad sitting all the time and hunched over and all these things. And so we were able to work together and talk about the differences between different breathing exercises to help
Hmm.
prevent the pneumonia and just all the different things that we were able to go through so they can educate you on how to have that more effective communication. And other times they're going to do that for you. So I think that's an important line and distinction to know. Can I advocate for myself in this position? And if not, where can I get help?
Gotcha, gotcha. And obviously, the time to prepare to learn to be an advocate is the same time you prepare to learn first aid. You don't learn first aid after the car wreck. You learn it. Hopefully, there won't be one, but you want to have those skills in hand. So, tell us your website if you would, your URL.
It's WTA Journey. It's Wellness Through Awareness is the name. So WTA Journey.com.
Great. And then people can go there and get this advocacy package that
Hmm.
basically informs them on how to go about it. And then if somebody wants to go deeper, they can take your master class.
Yep.
This is really good because some people have complicated situations, and very often it happens. You have a family member that really can't fully take care of themselves, and it's a complex thing. So they absolutely need someone to get trained in advocacy to act as an advocate. And then your second point is, like everything, maybe I can fix a leaky sink, but if the pipe bursts in the wall, I'm probably better call that plumber. And that's the nurse advocacy. How long roughly has the nurse advocacy business or industry or profession been around? It's a new concept to me.
That's what nurses are, as advocates.
Okay, but I mean, you know what I mean? But I mean,
Yeah,
ones where
I
they've
get
hung
it.
out, I know they're supposed to be advocates in the ideal world. Yeah.
Um, I don't know. I've been aware it's probably been 10 years. I mean, we saw this shift. Sometimes, like, health coaches can kind of be the same.
Hmm.
When we started seeing more of a holistic functional approach to medicine start to shift, we saw nurses moving into these nurse advocate type roles. I would definitely say at least 10 years, but probably a little bit more in very like niche markets. Um, and because I mean, it's hard to justify for the average person paying out of pocket for a nurse when you can go to the hospital and you get a nurse. But unfortunately, what we found now is for whatever reason, the nurses in the hospital are either not able because of whatever circumstance or they're unwilling to do that job.
Gotcha.
Um, and so now I think people are starting to say, okay, this is worth my money because it may mean me getting out of the hospital alive or having a much higher quality of life. So people's priorities are shifting. We're moving away from that take two aspirin and call me in the morning mentality, which is beautiful because we have to have patient accountability and ownership in their health. So it's been an interesting transition.
Yeah. So it's now a kind of a standalone profession. Like there are people and companies that have set themselves up in the nurse advocacy business.
Yeah, it's been amazing to watch those. I think you you've done a lot of different interviews. Kimberly Overton is one of those. I have worked with a company called Solace, SOLACE, dot health, I think, and that's a great one. And then Graith Care is a really popular company that has worked with some pretty big names, in our world. They've been around for several years, and I've seen some of their work, and they've done a great job growing. So um, I think you know there's different options and ways that you can go. You can search within your community. Reaching out into that holistic network is a great way to find different practitioners, because I know there are a lot of independent contractors, and that's what drew me to the Solace company, is because I could work for myself, and not have to be reliant on somebody else. And it was a great way to meet patients who really wanted to work on themselves.
Gotcha. And this is maybe it's not a separate issue, but it's sort of maybe not immediately on our focus, but it actually is. Is we really all are ultimately responsible for our own health. And you might have said this on the call or before in our pre-talk. Nobody is going to care as much as you. It's just a fact. And the more you know, the better. I want to raise one other issue around this, and then transition to the care for nurses, which is a very important topic. What, clearly we know that it can go terribly wrong. For instance, with the COVID protocols, and there were people in ICUs that weren't qualified, and there were hospital administrators that were, enforcing procedures that clearly were not working and detrimental. I mean, so what we've been talking about is important, absolutely important thing that everybody should, if you brush your teeth and you tie your shoes, you should probably learn to be a medical advocate too, um, because it's going to come up either for yourself or a loved one. And again, if you get in over your head, which anybody can at any time with anything, well, I call, most things in business I deal with myself, but maybe I need to call a lawyer on this one, or I need to ask my accountant to do special research, or I need to get a tax authority, or I need to hire a doctor, or there's a million things where you have to go to somebody outside. What can you say about what happens when a system is not just it's not just a situation where we all want to be more effective. We want to communicate better. We want to be more knowledgeable. We're anticipating a cooperative doctor, which we have to admit is not always the case. We're not always going to find a cooperative, respectful doctor. At which point, maybe you change doctors if you're able, and some programs won't let you. I mean, would just rule of thumb, you have a doctor that's dismissive and not communicative. It's time to go if you can, right? Yeah, give out of the game, right? Um, Okay, good. So, but what's your thoughts on when it's crazy town, when things have really gone off the rails? What can you
I,
advise people?
I think they have to get that advocate. If you, so I'm a nurse. I've had a lot of experience in um, medical situations. My youngest daughter was born at 24 weeks. We've talked about this. We had a bunch of health problems before that could have been prevented, and I really had to do a lot of advocacy for myself and for her to keep us alive. Very traumatic. I am the type of person that I get hyper rational in emergency situations.
Mm,
My emotions shut down.
mm,
I see things in a very clinical approach. If you can do that, you might be okay. But I was still calling my nurse friends and asking for help, phone a friend, right?
okay.
Um, if you are the type of person that gets highly emotional and shuts down that critical thinking, logical side of your brain, you either need to snap out of it and figure out a way to get through it, or you need to get that advocate. Um, I used to recommend calling the patient advocate at the hospital or the charge nurse, because when I worked in the hospital, you know, they would try to help out. And now those roles have morphed and turned into more of a PR crisis
Hmm.
management type role. And so
Crisis
you,
management for the hospital, not
for
for
the hospital,
yeah,
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 yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, so it's not really effective anymore. So you need to be able to have a person that you can turn to that's a little bit removed. And I think that's where that advocate really comes in. Um, if you can lock in and you can say, okay, I really need to know what the problem is and how we overcome the problem, or what's complicating achieving that. And if you can't do that, you got to get that outside help. You got to call in that advocate. Um, and it's putting yourself in these networks and plugging in, because you never know when it's going to happen, or when you're going to need that help. If you participate in Western medicine, um, it could be any time. So I think it's just going back to knowing who your resources are, finding those people that you can link up with, and then having these discussions with your family members ahead of time.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you know what those risks are, okay, mom, you have heart failure and you're probably going to have to go into the hospital because they're going to need to give you Lasix. Or can you afford a concierge doctor that can make a house call and do that at home?
Mm-hmm.
What kind of proactive means can you use to get out of the hospital? Those no longer apply when you're there, right? But if you've had the conversations with your family, they know what you want, you have it in writing. Okay, I don't want remdesivir. I don't want blah 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 blah. You have that footing, because I think sometimes that's where problems happen too, is people get nervous. Am I making the right decision? Am I going to kill mom? um because the patient becomes unable, or your spouse, young people going into the hospital, these emergency situations, thinking clearly is really almost impossible in those situations. So
Sure.
reaching out for that advocate, having the conversations, writing things down, your wishes, and knowing where to turn when you get into that situation. Because I mean, it's tough. It's really tough.
And you made the really interesting point. You're an experienced nurse, but when you were in it, you had to pick up the phone and call nurse friends to get their second opinion. So it's not a sign of weakness. It's actually being smart to get as much help as you can.
I struggle with PTSD, and we talked a little bit about my social anxiety, and this is part of it. This is part of why I struggle so much, is because it's like your soul wants to come out of your body and like perform a, make a protective shield, or maybe even cause bodily injury to some doctors, right? And there's nothing you can do about it, and there's a complete disconnect. And my heart goes out to these people who've had these situations and know where to turn, because you are rendered completely helpless. And I think this is a really good segue into moral injury. But you're in a situation, in a place where your family member is supposed to be loved and cared for and treated with respect and dignity and healed, and you're watching them suffer and die. How do you make peace with that? Like, so it's not just the physical help, but being able to turn to an advocate, go over the things, make sure you're making the right decisions, or the best decisions that you can make in those scenarios, and having that encouragement and reinforcement, and maybe even putting out fires. Like, yes, I understand that you're concerned about this, but the reason that we can't do this, or the reason that we have to do this, is because another problem has come up, you
Hmm.
know
Hmm.
and sorting through the clinical aspects of it. So that is normal, and as nurses, that's one of the things that we often do. We always go check with the buddy. When in doubt, you go ask a friend. Like, you see what somebody else's clinical judgment would be, because people look at things from different perspectives. So having that advocate is more than just about the safety and well-being, but also the mental
Right.
exhaustion.
Right. It's not just you making all these decisions in a vacuum. We want to talk in depth about this thing called moral injury, and we're not going to be able to do it in this time zone. But I do want to do that, and I think it deserves its own program, because it's a big issue, and it's really important. So you made a really interesting point at the beginning of our conversation, which I fully agree with, which is there were problems in the way our medical system functions long before COVID, and COVID just made it 10 times worse. The wheels just came off. And there are systematic problems within the institutions, and changing that's going to be a slow process. We're not going to change that this week. But one thing that human beings can do for themselves is to be forearmed with knowledge, having thought through some of the issues before. That doesn't, and let me say this though, it doesn't mean it's necessarily going to be easy when you're in the situation. And that doesn't mean that every doctor is going to be respectful and responsive. We have to just face that. And it also doesn't mean that every medical system is going to be behaving ethically, because I think it's pretty clear that some of these medical systems were just following the cash register. And that's a whole nother dimension. But what we want to focus on with Ashley is the empowerment of everybody to be more knowledgeable about their health, uh, to realize preparation, an ounce of preparation is worth 10 pounds of cure. Uh, there's a resource available at your website, which is W. Okay.
WTAjourney.com.
Gotcha. WTAjourney.com. You can get the information about learning how to be an effective advocate for yourself or loved ones. And if you want to dive deep, you can do a master training in it. And then the other thing that Ashley brought up to us, which is so important, is that everybody, doctors, nurses, no matter how many decades of experience they have, uh, they might hit a wall themselves and go, I really need to pick up the phone and call my friend who's been around this particular problem more than I have. So that's called nurse advocates. And this is now becoming an industry, a service industry, just like a lawyer, just like your tax accountant. Um, we need all this help to get through the modern world. Uh, and so this is something to do where you're getting information, you're getting perspective, you're getting approaches, okay, here's how you go, here's how to talk to the doctor on this, here's the questions to ask, or you know what, I'm going to call and I'm going to do it for you. And then you have that human being so that you're not feeling that, oh my God, all this is on me and I'm not a trained doctor and I'm not a trained nurse and the person I love most in the world is at risk here. And what am I doing? I don't even know what I'm doing. So that's where these advocates come in. So it's a new thing to me. I never thought about about knowing of a nurse advocate or training myself in how to advocate for myself. Uh, it's not, there may be times when you do need to go to war with the hospitals and the medical system, but you don't need to start on that footing. And even if you have to go to war, um, it's still good to have this base up here, right? So whatever comes up, if it's a pleasant situation, good. If it's challenging, good. If it's way challenging, okay, at least you're fighting on solid ground. So Ashley, thanks again for joining us. We will have the moral injury conversation because it's very important.
Yep, I look forward to it.